directors and regional staff for CRS.
We're going to get started here, ladies and gentlemen, if you wouldn't mind taking a seat. My name is Erik Olson. I'm the Associate Director of the Latin American program and have been very involved in issues related to crime and violence in Latin America for many years, and had the privilege, I would say, of living in Honduras for 2 years from 1986 to 1988. I wish I could say those were the good old days, but probably weren't the good old days in the traditional sense. But the problems, the challenges, the obstacles that Central America has faced, that face today, certainly were present in very real and vivid ways in the mid-'80s and even before. And what we wanted to do today was not just focus on those challenges, those difficulties, the causes of the violence and the migration and the things we've been reading about in the press, but also to focus on some of the efforts that are underway, that have been underway for some time, to try to respond to this chronic and endemic problem. I was tempted to call this the good news panel, but probably that would have been probably a little too optimistic. I might have had a revolt amongst the panelists. So I won't call it the good news panel, but I will call it it's worth giving it a try panel, right? We're not just giving up. There is hope. When people ask me, are you hopeful or are you not hopeful? Of course, I'm always hopeful. There always is hope that something can be done. We can't just walk away and abandon children and societies. So I'm delighted that we have with us a group of panelists who know these issues in and out. They don't have any, I think, romantic views of what this is all about. Have been on the ground, en el terreno, as they say, batallando, thinking about how to address some of these problems. And we very much wanted to bring the perspective of practitioners, those who have struggled, and I don't want to prejudge, but maybe in some instances even failed in that struggle, but learned from it. So we're going to start out with Miguel Cortés Bofil. He's a Spanish Jesuit priest who has lived in Guatemala since 2009, and he's currently the Central America Regional Coordinator for the Fundación Educativa Fe y Alegría and the organization's General Director in Guatemala. His fuller biography, am I talking too close? We got reprimanded for talking too close in the previous one. But he is going to talk from his vast experience, many years of experience in Central America, especially Guatemala and El Salvador. And then delighted to have with us also Catherine Andrade Eckhoff, currently coordinator of programs related to leadership, service, and employability for at-risk youth in El Salvador for Catholic Relief Services, CRS, the other CRS, the real CRS, let's be honest. Oh, no, there's some CRS people in here. My apologies. Has been a real force and presence in Central America for many years. In fact, I want to acknowledge my very good friend Patrick Ahern that worked with CRS in Honduras in the 1980s and now with the IF. But they have been a presence in Central America for many years, and Catherine has vast experience there as well, dealing with some of these issues. So delighted to have Catherine. And then a friend of many years, not to call him an old friend, but Rodrigo Serrano from the World Bank. He's partnered with us, been here on many occasions, a real expert on the issues in Central America. He is a social development specialist in the Latin American Caribbean region at the World Bank, and he has a vast breadth of experience, not only in research and understanding the problem, but also helping design lending programs, loans, and public policies to implement by governments in the region. So Rodrigo is going to be our commentator, our discussant, after the presentations by Miguel and Catherine. So let's start with Miguel. He has a PowerPoint, then Catherine, and then Rodrigo will comment at the end. So thank you very much.
Bueno, gracias. Voy a pasar. Muy buenos días y muchas gracias por tener la oportunidad de estar aquí con todos ustedes. Yo voy a hablar desde la experiencia de bastantes años de trabajo en educación popular en zonas urbano-marginales de Centroamérica y especialmente pues, de la propuesta de nuestro movimiento internacional Fe y Alegría. ¿Hay esperanzas para los jóvenes? Sí. Digo, tenemos que partir de ahí. Yo soy educador y no puedo decir que no, ¿verdad? Creo que se ha hablado antes en el anterior panel mucho, pues quizás de los efectos de una situación como la violencia, ¿verdad? Pero las raíces tenemos que ir un poco más allá. No se trata solo de tener una mirada o preventiva y represiva, sino ir un poco a buscar ese enfoque de derechos, ¿verdad? Desde ahí también quiero presentar un poco la propuesta nuestra. Es un derecho ser persona, es un derecho ser joven, pero lamentablemente vamos a ver algunos datos del contexto de Guatemala y vemos que el 50% de los homicidios que se producen en Centroamérica, ¿verdad?, son jóvenes, para los jóvenes, ¿verdad? La tasa de homicidios es en Guatemala de las más altas del mundo, ¿verdad?, entre 15 y 24 años. Y este fenómeno se da principalmente en las escuelas que están insertas en comunidades violentas. También la violencia está en la familia, ¿verdad?, la violencia intrafamiliar, y por lo tanto escuela y familia son como los lugares donde está ese caldo de cultivo de la violencia. El fenómeno del femicidio también, ¿verdad?, ha sido un incremento altísimo, 390% en 10 años en Guatemala, ¿verdad? Ya la fiscal Claudia Paz y Paz amplió mucho el tema del contexto, no voy a entrar, pero sí quizás ver la magnitud del problema. Y es que en Guatemala casi un 40% de jóvenes de 13 a 18 años no van a la escuela, están fuera del sistema escolar, ¿no?, en hombres y en mujeres. Y este es el gran problema. ¿Dónde están esos jóvenes que no van a la escuela? Bueno, aquí hay un problema grave y es que el Estado no tiene capacidad, ¿verdad?, porque le faltan recursos de proporcionar ese derecho a la educación. En Guatemala se invierte, no llega al 3% del Producto Interior Bruto en educación, en el presupuesto del 2014 y que está previsto para el 2015. En cambio, en seguridad, en lo que nos han contado en el panel anterior, se invierte un 7% en seguridad. En una mala seguridad, bueno, ya, ¿verdad?, ya lo han dicho. Es increíble, bueno, cómo la seguridad es un negocio en Guatemala, porque las élites y los grandes empresarios y las empresas pues contratan buena seguridad, carros blindados y todos sistemas bien costosos, tecnológicos, para estar resguardados, pero en cambio en las poblaciones pues marginadas, la seguridad, ¿quién la ejerce? La ejerce la Mara. Aparecía ahí un dato interesante de percepción, cómo las pandillas garantizan una seguridad a través de la extorsión. Claro, es una seguridad condicionada, ¿no?, y quizás deberíamos de cambiarla. Pero también tenemos que darnos cuenta que si bien hay cobertura en educación primaria en Guatemala, un 90% más o menos, no es así en secundaria. En secundaria no llega al 40% la cobertura educativa del Estado. Y por eso es importante apostar a una educación pública, ¿verdad?, a una educación que responda al derecho que tiene todo joven a estar educado. Bien, en este sentido, Fe y Alegría, nosotros nos ubicamos como educación pública, gratuita y de calidad. Pensamos que si no hay educación pública para todos, si no se ejerce ese derecho a la educación, no podrá haber igualdad de oportunidades. Como les decía, en Guatemala la educación privada es mayoritaria, sobre todo en el sector de la población adolescente. Cuando un niño termina la primaria, gratuita o pública, las posibilidades de continuar se reducen en un 20%. Y si tiene que ir a la privada, es muy costosa. Con lo cual, ahí hay una discriminación muy fuerte en el sistema educativo que expulsa, ¿verdad?, a jóvenes del sistema y que van a ingresar pues a estos sistemas ilícitos de organización como son las pandillas y otros, o la migración, que es el otro fenómeno, ¿verdad? Nosotros entonces le apostamos a esta educación gratuita, pero de calidad, porque si es verdad que en primaria es gratuita el 90%, pero no es de calidad. Y este es el otro concepto, ¿verdad? ¿Cómo conjugamos gratuidad y calidad para que sea realmente una educación pública que responda a los intereses de las mayorías de nuestros pueblos, ¿verdad? Y también una educación para la transformación social, ¿verdad? Nosotros entendemos en nuestras escuelas, son más que escuelas, son comunidades educativas insertas en los barrios que transforman esas comunidades. Y estamos en el área periurbana, en la zona 18, en el Limón, tenemos 2 centros, más de 1.600 estudiantes, ¿verdad? En un supuestamente barrio seguro, pero no es nada seguro, ¿verdad? Allí nos extorsionan, allí pues tenemos jóvenes que son asesinados, incluso recientemente hubo uno que por llevar el celular, ¿no?, a otra población fue tomado por los pobladores y fue linchado, y murió linchado, ¿verdad? Y el muchacho era de segundo básico de nuestro centro. Y esto es muy común, porque es muy fácil decir represión, policía, pero ¿qué hace un joven, verdad? ¿Qué hace un joven donde no tiene opciones? La opción para sobrevivir es obedecer a la mara o morir, ¿no? Entonces esto es muy trágico, y entonces nos tenemos que poner en el lugar de estos jóvenes, ¿no? O los niños de primaria de estos mismos barrios, ¿no?, que dicen, yo quiero ser de mayor pandillero, ¿verdad? Este es su ideal ya, que se va fraguando, porque es un modo de vivir, ¿no? Entonces, ¿cómo rompemos esa mala cultura? Bueno, ahí está la educación. ¿Cómo desde la familia, desde la escuela, transformamos la sociedad? Y nosotros le llamamos pues esa promesa de valor, hacer juntos lo que solos no podemos. Solos no podemos combatir la violencia, solos no podemos combatir el mal, tenemos que sumar iniciativas de todo tipo. Nosotros vamos a presentar hoy algunas alternativas, primero desde el sistema educativo formal, ¿verdad? Porque, como le digo, los niños pasan mucho tiempo en la escuela y realmente se han hecho estudios que cuanto más tiempo pasa un niño, un joven en la escuela, menos son las probabilidades para que ingrese en una pandilla. El problema es la discontinuidad del sistema educativo. Un niño hace la preprimaria en un lugar, la primaria en otro, la secundaria en otro. En esa discontinuidad van desertando, ¿verdad?, y van saliendo del sistema jóvenes que no pueden continuar su trayectoria formativa, y eso es un peligro, porque eso sí alimentan pues las maras, o como le decía también, pues emigran hacia los Estados Unidos o otros países, ¿verdad? Entonces, pensamos que la primera opción para esta franja de secundaria es una educación técnica en y para el trabajo. ¿Cómo incorporar la educación técnica en la currícula de secundaria para que los jóvenes aprendan un oficio, tengan una experiencia ya laboral? Porque se requieren de 10 a 12 años de escolaridad para poder salir del círculo de la pobreza. Y en Guatemala la escolaridad no llega a 6 años. Entonces estamos casi por la mitad del tiempo que necesitaría una persona, ¿verdad?, de formación para poder dar ese salto entre la extrema pobreza y una vida en calidad. Y la educación no termina en el aula, ni en la escuela, sino que trasciende a la comunidad, y ahí es donde nosotros pensamos que la educación técnica tiene mucha importancia, porque inserta al joven primero en potenciar sus habilidades personales, ¿verdad? Puede reconocer que tiene talentos, ¿verdad?, que puede reparar un electrodoméstico, que puede hacer un trabajo, ¿verdad?, y que ese trabajo se remunera y entonces encuentra una satisfacción personal. que eso es muy importante. Muchos de estos jóvenes marginados, llamémosle así, ¿verdad? Son de una baja autoestima, porque vienen de hogares desestructurados y entonces también necesitan que se les fortalezca ese elemento personal, de crecimiento personal. El trabajo fortalece esas expectativas, ¿verdad? Entonces la escuela y la empresa, la educación y el trabajo son binomios de unidad para una verdadera cohesión social. No podemos desvincular la empresa de la escuela y ese es un gran esfuerzo que estamos realizando. En este sentido tenemos todo un programa de intermediación laboral. ¿Cómo relacionamos la escuela con empresas? Evidentemente es insuficiente porque las grandes empresas tienen otra manera de entender quizás esta relación. Ellos prefieren la responsabilidad social empresarial, tienen sus propias fundaciones filantrópicas, ¿verdad? Pero quizás valdría la pena repensar eso. ¿Cómo vinculamos la empresa con las escuelas a nivel local? Pequeñas empresas locales que puedan insertar jóvenes en esas prácticas laborales. Nosotros estamos trabajando en esta línea y también en un programa que se llama Servicio de Informática Educativa para el Trabajo, SIET, que es cursos online a los jóvenes de secundaria, ¿verdad? De 4 módulos de mes y medio en el que se les capacita en competencias laborales, conocer las empresas, preparándose para conseguir un empleo y buscar el empleo. Esto es fundamental para que estos jóvenes vayan entrando en el mundo del trabajo, ¿no? También otro factor importantísimo es todo el tema de la formación en valores. La formación en valores que se da no como una materia, ¿verdad?, sino que es una transversal en la currícula educativa. Y fortalecer esos valores desde una perspectiva de cultura de paz. Esto lo estamos realizando en todos los centros educativos de Fe y Alegría, ¿verdad? No como una asignatura, como les digo, sino como una transversal que tiene que impregnar toda la escuela, de toda acción, ¿verdad? Y en este sentido tenemos un método que se llama método plenitud, un método pedagógico que es una adaptación del currículo nacional base en el que los niños ya desde pequeños tienen que configurar proyectos de aula para la paz, ¿no? Y no solo proyectos de aula, proyectos de escuela para la paz y proyectos de barrio para la paz. Entonces es pasar del aula a la escuela, de la escuela al barrio. Esto es todo un trabajo, bueno, que en el paper que vamos a presentar estará más detallado que ahora en la exposición, ¿verdad? Pero quisiera destacar este programa que es Protagonismo Juvenil Organizado. Este es un programa centroamericano, no solo en Guatemala. Los realizamos en los 5 países donde está Fe y Alegría en Centroamérica. Y es un programa con una metodología de educación popular en la que buscamos formar líderes juveniles, que el joven sea protagonismo a través de la acción, ¿verdad? Y que se apropie básicamente de sus derechos como joven. Contextualizar la acción educativa en los barrios donde estamos trabajando y este programa, por ejemplo, tiene 5 fases, ¿verdad? La primera es la fase de introducción del programa en cada una de nuestras escuelas, sensibilización, concientización, se investigan las causas de la pobreza y de las desigualdades y la falta de oportunidades que hay en los barrios. Una etapa de empoderamiento, que es cuando el joven reflexiona sobre el poder, qué significa tener poder, ¿verdad? El poder de la palabra, el poder de la opinión pública, ¿verdad? La organización, pretendemos que estos jóvenes se organicen, ¿verdad? Una organización distinta quizás a la estructura ilícita y que pase esa organización para una movilización social. Entonces los jóvenes hacen acciones de servicio social en los barrios a nivel municipal y no solo a nivel local, sino también pretendemos que pueda ser alguna movilización a nivel de todo el país. Y finalmente, los jóvenes aprenden a sistematizar sus logros y sus experiencias, ¿no? Este programa, como les digo, pues reúne jóvenes de las escuelas nuestras de Fe y Alegría de los barrios marginados y tiene un impacto importantísimo porque estos jóvenes son embajadores de esa cultura de paz, incluso en sus propias familias, ¿verdad? Otra propuesta es que nosotros realizamos proyectos en alianza con otros actores, ¿verdad? Tenemos un proyecto que se llama Casa Joven, que es con la Secretaría de Bienestar Social, ¿verdad? Que aquí lo que se trata es de dar pues atención psicosocial a estos jóvenes que son parientes o familiares ya de muchachos que están en las pandillas, ¿verdad? Y también otro proyecto que se llama Juventud Emprendedora o Escuelas Abiertas, que había hablado también la licenciada Paz y Paz, ¿verdad? Que, bueno, cambió de nombre, ahora se llama Jóvenes Protagonistas. Nosotros participamos en 2 centros con este programa que es del Gobierno, del Ministerio de Desarrollo Social, pero que es insuficiente. Vuelvo un poco al principio de la exposición, no hay recursos, ¿verdad?, suficientes. Son programas que implican también personal idóneo y, sobre todo, que los mismos educadores de los centros educativos se apropien de estos programas. En Guatemala, este gobierno actual creó un Ministerio de Desarrollo Social, pero totalmente divorciado del Ministerio de Educación. Y entonces se hacen acciones descoordinadas tremendamente. La falta de coordinación en las instancias gubernamentales pues genera más caos que prosperidad en los barrios, porque es en lo local donde se vive la unicidad de las acciones que tienen impacto social, ¿verdad? Entonces, si creamos muchos actores y poco coordinados, entonces la dispersión no favorece a que tengamos un impacto positivo. Y también otro elemento fundamental es lo que llamamos la falta de energía, ¿no? Esto es fundamental para todo. Pero es el tema de la cogestión. Miren, la cogestión es un modelo pedagógico, es decir, cómo hacemos que en las escuelas sean cogestionadas no solo por los docentes, sino también por los padres y madres de familia. Hubo una experiencia también en Guatemala, se llamaba PRONADE, en El Salvador se llamó EDUCA, etcétera, que fueron rechazadas con el tiempo, pero que dejaron algún impacto. ¿Cómo involucramos a los padres y madres de familia en los centros educativos? Nosotros tenemos en cada centro educativo una asociación de padres y madres de familia con personalidad jurídica que se implican en la gestión del centro. También los gobiernos estudiantiles, los gobiernos docentes. Si no hay cogestión educativa, difícilmente va a haber participación y una ciudadanía que logre la cohesión social. Y finalmente, ya algunas conclusiones, voy a pasar rápido. La idea en promoción social sería focalizar los servicios educativos, el tema de la focalización, ¿verdad? El tema de alianzas con otras organizaciones, trabajo en red es fundamental, ¿verdad? El tema de los padres y madres de familia, el tema de la formación en valores y el tema del protagonismo juvenil organizado. Y en el ámbito de educación integral, también responder a la demanda educativa, sobre todo en las áreas urbano-marginales, asumir una propuesta pedagógica clara, ¿verdad?, de educación popular, y esto implica tener una opción ética, política y pedagógica. El tema de la intermediación laboral, la formación técnica, y yo entiendo que la formación técnica es cara por el componente de equipos, pero es la que nos puede sacar al joven, ¿verdad?, con esperanzas. La adaptación o contextualización del currículum nacional base de cada país, ¿verdad? Cómo actualizamos esos currículums para que sean flexibles. El tema, ¿no?, de la participación ciudadana y la inserción laboral. Como el tiempo creo que es corto, de todas maneras, en el paper va a estar más explicitado todas estas propuestas desde de Fe y Alegría Guatemala y de Centroamérica. Muchas gracias.
Gracias. Catherine?
Ya no sé si apaga esto.
No, ahí lo puede cambiar.
First, I want to thank the Wilson Center for the opportunity to share our experiences with you, but also to interact with this fantastic group of people, and to the previous panel for doing such a great job at setting the stage for this panel. When I was asked to talk about are there alternatives for youth trapped in violent environments, and is there hope for Central American youth, it actually caused me to stop and think about how I actually feel about this. And it literally depends on the day. So we actually end with a more hopeful picture here, but it does literally depend on the day. It's becoming harder and harder to find those spaces of hope. It is extremely challenging work. Miguel mentioned, the extortions that they face in their schools. It's very, very real. So from CRS, Catholic Relief Services, not the Cruz Roja Salvadoreña or the Congressional Research Service, okay, adding another CRS there. We've been trying to figure out how we actually create alternatives for the high rates of youth unemployment, the spiral of violence, and the migration. Young people are at the eye of the hurricane, at the center of the storm in each of those issues. And we've actually been doing really great on this, except, so I just want to share this next slide with you. Monday, I was preparing the paper, right? This was Tuesday's headline. And it's actually, when you look at the article, it's actually 43%. La Prensa Gráfica decided to bump it up a little bit. We have to understand, the tension between the new FMLL government and the business sector, and especially newspapers, because a new set of taxes were just passed in the country. And so, nonetheless, this speaks volumes about what is happening, and how adults find hope also. And if half the population, and Carlos Dada reminded me on my Facebook page, it's not half the population, it's half the population that's still living in El Salvador, because about a quarter is outside the country. What kind of hope is there? So I do want to share with you, without cheerleading too much, but I have a hard time not cheerleading on this. We've been just really doing this fantastic program with national partners that includes Fe Alegría in El Salvador, based on a model in the United States from Youth Build. We've been adapting it over the last 5 years. And it focuses really on these two issues, on unleashing the positive energy and intelligence of youth at risk, and youth that may even be gang involved in being agents of change, and really centering the belief that it's these young people, and since our countries are so young, half the population is below 25, we have to find solutions that include them, where they are the ones making the change, and really believing that even the kids in the poorest and most marginalized circumstances are the ones that have the ability to be able to do that. And we as adults need to help them unleash that. We have also been looking at trying to figure out, well, how does this program, the Jóvenes Constructores or Youth Builders program, and adaptations off of that, change violence in communities? And researchers have actually been telling us, you need to look at how the violence in the communities is impacting your program. And as we've seen this more and more, that is more the case of what we're having to deal with. But I do want to share with you a little bit about what we do and kind of what, kind of the big finding we've had from the last couple of years. We've had over 4,000 kids that have participated since March of 2010 through the end of 2013. We have an 83% graduation rate. We have an 80% insertion rate between jobs, self-employment, or going back to school. And we're one of the few programs that actually has outcome data. It's very hard to find other programs that are able to measure what happens to young people after they get trained. The program provides life skills, job skills, vocational training, leadership, service, and entrepreneurship, a lot of things that Miquel was mentioning through Fe Alegría as well. Fe Alegría has been one of our partners. And I think probably the most important thing that the program provides is what's located in this heart. Family, leadership, opportunity, and service. And an external evaluation that was finished at the end of last year also identified, in addition to all the insertion that goes on, that the program is building resilience in young people. Resilience being the ability to overcome adversity. And now that we know that, we can work to make sure that we intentionally build it into the program. This kind of happened by accident as we were learning on what to do and how to do it. A strong sense of belonging, finding safety in the program, both physical and emotional, consistency and expectations, programming and behavior, and then support through meaningful relationships and services. Those are the key elements that need to be part of programs. It's not just what you teach young people, it's more important how you teach them and how they are involved in articulating that teaching. And so that's been kind of our big thing of making sure that this is a part of whatever goes on in youth programming. However, the program is constantly impacted by violence on a daily basis. And we have seen that even though we've been doing fantastic work, it is not enough. And just doing it by itself in a neighborhood will not get us over the hump. So we've been also looking at what other things have gone on in other places, here in the US in particular, and how to articulate integrated approaches. So most of the programming that goes on for at-risk youth and violence prevention is secondary prevention focused on 16 to 25-year-olds. But that's not going to do anything for the young man that Anthony was mentioning, right, who started his gang activity at 8. We need to have programs that are working in primary prevention, in secondary prevention with younger children, in secondary prevention with older youth, in tertiary or violence interruption, in reintegration of the thousands and thousands and thousands of people that are in prisons and the juvenile justice system, because once they come out, they have no other alternative than illicit activities. And there needs to be intelligent, strategic, surgical crime prevention, crime suppression. Like what Claudia Paz y Paz was talking about. We've had, in many of the neighborhoods that we've been working in, the police will come in, they will do massive activities and arrests, and it sets up then a reaction by the gangs afterwards where they continue to dominate and control the territory even more. While the homicide rate went down during a certain period in El Salvador, partly, in large part probably to the gang truce, our security measures increased. It became harder and harder to do this work, and I think we need to look at indicators other than homicide rates to look at the well-being of a community in these neighborhoods to be able to measure what's going on. So in doing this sort of integrated approach, and there have been folks in AID that have been looking at this. We've seen a lot of the work coming out of Los Angeles surrounding this. They need to be simultaneous. Most of it is like, well, we'll start one program here, and then we'll add in another program later on, or one will start, the funding will end, and then you do something else. All of these things need to be happening simultaneously. They need to be targeted at specific populations. And one of the challenges is how to reach the harder to reach young people. Not the ones that are more likely to show up, but going out and getting those kids that aren't coming and aren't showing up, that have dropped out of school, that have one foot in and one foot out of gang activity or life. It needs to be territorially focused. Each of these peldaños or activities needs to have their own specific outcome indicators that are being measured continually to find out whether or not you're on track. And it's not just how many people showed up to your training or your activity, it's what they do with that afterwards. And NGOs and organizations doing this work have a very hard time figuring out how you measure that. At the same time, we have a hard time figuring out how you work with academics that know how to measure that. So we work on different time frames. Having worked for 20 years as an academic, I know that. So with the whole thing, there needs to be an impact indicators. to be able to assess the strategy as you're going along. And these need to be measured continually and used to adjust and adapt the strategy during the program and not at the end. Typically, we'll do the final evaluation after everything's ended, and we need to have that. But if we don't have the other stuff going on in the meantime, we have no idea how things are working. And these pieces need to be integrated, and integrated in a way that doesn't mean just we coordinate together for meetings, but we are really integrating, because these kids fall through the cracks all the time. We've been trying to analyze cost-benefit stuff. This is not, we're just starting on this at CRS. It's been back of the envelope calculations so far of, well, how much does it cost per young person in a program like Jóvenes Constructores, more or less full-time, about $1,400. Imprisoning somebody for a year is about $1,100 in 300% overcrowding, so it costs much more than that. But probably we need to be making sure that there's enough money going into primary prevention, secondary prevention, tertiary, and the crime suppression. Increase per person will go up, I would imagine, in each of these, but we need to make sure that the funding as well as the human resources are available. And the previous panel talked about making sure that we have social workers. Personally, I think we need armies of social workers and psychologists and teachers and less police. Neighborhoods that we're working in, there are a lot of police, and this stuff continues to go on. We need different type of policing that's been going on. So the last two slides, I was debating, am I going to end with this one or the next one? And I decided to end with the next one, and you'll see it in a second. Father Mauricio Gaurit, Jesuit priest and head of the psychology department at the UCA, the Jesuit University in El Salvador, has been doing research on unaccompanied minors for several years, especially those being deported massively from Mexico. And he talks about the options that young people face, and the reason children have been leaving so much is that they live in a dark, dead-end alley. Un callejón sin salida. That's what most people face. Most young people, a lot of young people, not a lot of young people. And their alternative to that dark, dead-end alley is the dark, dangerous tunnel north. This is painted on the facade of one of the Fe Alegría sites where we have been doing our Jóvenes Constructores program. This is a mural. Oh, okay, so it's MS, Ma Salvatrucha. The SLLS is San Luis Locos. Ver, oír, callar, o morir. See, hear, shut up, or die. It's enforced. This is the facade of the one of the other Fe Alegría sites where we're also working. This site actually is a much more dangerous site. We had a shooting there last year. We were working with Youth in Conflict with the Law. We had to shut that program down. They are literally in the crossfire between gang rivalries there. The other site, this one is a little bit easier to work in because it's just the MS that dominates there. It's a block and a half from one of the main roads. And for kids to participate in this program, they have to live in a territory dominated by MS. If they live in a territory dominated by 18th Street, they cannot come to this program. So when we're talking about territorial control, that's one of the big issues. And to me, the gang truce should be addressing that, the use of public space and the ability for people to be able to circulate freely in public space. This is the doorway to hope. we need to have multiple pathways for young people. They need to be continuous. They need to be safe and full of opportunities, creating a real sense of hope. So we'll just leave you with that picture. Thanks.
Okay, Rodrigo has the easy task of commenting and giving a perspective from the World Bank and his experience. So thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me, and congratulations to both speakers. Excellent presentations. And since this is a good news panel, I think there are some good news. I mean, I've been working for a few years now in Central America. Now I'm actually moving out of the region, working more in South America. But somebody from my team is working in Central America, because unfortunately it's still the priority for in terms of need, lack of capacity, and requests for support. And I think, I mean, these years I've seen progress in the discourse. I've seen progress in the capacity of our interlocutors, and I think these are some very good examples of the much more sophisticated approach that you see now in the region, where some of the basic principles about how to approach this very complex problem are already being discussed and trying to be implemented, which is a challenge, but that's how we learn and how we make progress. And and have to do with what I think very well Kay was presenting on the need for a comprehensive approach. I didn't see that there, but I think also there's a recognition of the relevance of local governments, of municipal governments as being sort of the key sort of institutional platform from where you need to provide and you need to articulate this comprehensive response. And again, I think that's something that you see a change with respect to 5 years ago. I think there's been quite a lot of progress in terms of primary prevention, and the work of Fe Alegría, I think it's a nice example of the importance of working through strengthening schools as places to build resilience against violence, and working with families. There is some interesting work going on in terms of secondary prevention, and I think what the work that CRS is doing is also very promising in terms of that. The emphasis on employment, I think is key. I mean, there's that saying that nothing stops a bullet like a job, and I think that's very true. At the same time, we know that it's not just jobs, and then so there is the need for these sort of wraparound services. What will make the difference for this particular population that has so many challenges and very different, and in each case, so the need for a case management approach is very much needed, and I think that's one of the challenge when you have in institutionally sort of deprived contexts where health services are not in place, where schools are very weak. Having access maybe to a well-trained psychologist is often a challenge But I think the direction in which the discussion and the work is going is the correct one. I think some of the challenges that still remain are also exemplified in a way by the fact that the two good news that we had here come from NGOs. Shows that when we looked at government, I don't know if there is any government program that I've seen in the region that has sort of made a big impact in this area. I don't know of it, maybe it exists, but I haven't seen it yet. And I think that's that's one of the challenges. That's what we are trying modestly to support in some of the countries that we're working on, and it's partly about. I mean, I do think that NGOs have a privileged entry point in this agenda because of the difficulty of working with this type of population. But we need to scale this up considerably and build the capacity of many more institutions to do this work and to reach the problem, tackle the problem that we're facing. I think the other challenge is that we focused quite a lot on primary and secondary, and I mean, as Kay was saying, we need a comprehensive approach, and the tertiary is an area where we need to be doing much more and experimenting and learning what works. We know that a big part of the violence is committed by a very small number of people. So and there are approaches, there are ways of dealing with that population. I was just coming from Rio. I was in Rio last week seeing the work that's happening in the pacified favelas and the not so pacified favelas. And you see some, I mean, I was looking in particular at one program called Luta pela Paz, Fight for Peace, which is a very well-known NGO that actually is working internationally, and they are dealing with the drug traffickers that have been for 10 years commanding 200, 400 people and soldiers in their favelas, and that now want to get out of it. And again, I mean, learning very interesting ways of dealing with this tough population. But I think the good news there is there are people, even in those, people that are hardcore, involved in this type of activities, that want to get out, and because maybe they have a child, or because they are at a different point in their lives where they are open to try something different, and there I think part of what we need is a better understanding of that population. I think we don't have a good understanding of that group of people. There are a lot of stereotypes. There's a lot, sometimes conflation with this notion of the ninis, the unemployed, out of school youth. Many of these people are people that had worked before in the formal sector. It's not just have had jobs. They had a pretty good education. Of course, many of them have challenges, but it's not, people completely marginalized, but it's when they went out to work, maybe they faced certain difficulties. There's also a pull from the opportunities that these type of activities provide, and so it's a very. I think we need better ethnographic work of this type of population, and what are the characteristics, and what would work for them to get out of it, and the other, I think, the last sort of area where, although we make progress in the region, I think there's a need for much more, is on the use of more sort of evidence-informed initiatives. There is a large number of interventions that have been tried in other contexts that have worked, and Youth Build is sort of an example of that you are adapting. But there are many more, and I think the last couple of years we've seen also very good interventions that have rigorous impact evaluations showing important results. And in particular, we have partnered with the Chicago Crime Lab, which has been experimenting with very interesting initiatives for youth involved in crime in Chicago, and I think the challenge there is how to make this information and this evidence base more accessible to our partners and help them in the process of adaptation. And that's in a way what from the bank we're trying to support doing. part of that effort is also, and this is a public announcement, a conference that we're organizing with USAID. Enrique Roy, I think, was here. We're organizing with Enrique in Guatemala in November 5 and 6 on youth violence. That we're looking exactly, as primary, secondary, tertiary prevention initiatives that have had strong impacts. As a way to contribute to the dissemination of good practices and help in the adaptation, working with mayors that are interested in supporting these initiatives and with national governments to adapt them to their reality. So for that, we also need better data, and maybe this is something that you've discussed, but to understand the nature of the problem. But this is, I think, one of the areas where we need to give more emphasis to. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Thank you, Rodrigo. Okay, we don't have a lot of time, but we do have a little time, and I think I'm going to follow the methodology Carlos used in the first panel, which is kind of to take a group of comments, questions. If you could keep them short, that would be great, and then allow our panelists and Rodrigo to make some final comments in response. So please raise your hand. Here's Tani. Start off.
Gracias, Tani Adams. Quería sacar un tema que comentó César, pero que ustedes volvieron a tocar de alguna manera indirecta, cuando él planteó la necesidad de un ejército de psicólogos o de trabajadores sociales, más bien comentó, ¿verdad? Y después me llama la atención que no han comentado el tema del trauma y cómo manejar el trauma, que me pareció muy interesante el trabajo que surgió en ese seminario del Banco Mundial en mayo, donde lo que salió fue, a mí me pareció una conclusión muy útil, ¿verdad?, que plantea que los efectos del trauma tienen que ser manejados tanto a nivel familiar como a nivel de las escuelas, en el sector de salud, en la pensada de cómo manejar el tema de inserción laboral y formación técnica. O sea, las poblaciones traumatizadas no se les puede abordar sin ese lente. Entonces, no sé, pero me parece que en los PowerPoints que ustedes enseñaron, no sé si está implícito o cómo lo están viendo, ¿verdad? Es la duda que tengo. Gracias.
Thank you. Another? Carlos?
Carlos Basombrío, Global Fellow here at the Wilson Center. Una pregunta que no tiene nada de novedosa, pero que siempre es necesario plantear, esta tensión entre las buenas prácticas y las políticas públicas, digamos. ¿Hasta qué punto? Y anticipo que sé que si la respuesta la planteo en términos de absolutos, la respuesta obvia es no, pero quiero plantearla en términos de progreso. ¿Ustedes sienten, perciben que hay una mayor receptividad, un mayor progreso en las autoridades estatales con las que tienen que trabajar en relación a incorporar experiencias que ustedes tienen a través de buenas prácticas y tratar de llevarlas a políticas públicas? ¿O sigue siendo un mundo separado, una pared que no se agrieta? ¿O perciben algún espacio positivo en relación a eso? Porque creo que mucho de la esperanza de que esto cambie pasa por ahí, ¿no? Entre, digamos, hasta qué punto se logra agrietar ese muro que es duro de romper. Y si la respuesta es absoluta me van a decir que no, por eso prefiero planteárselos en términos de gradualidad.
Cindy had a question here in the front, and then please, if you have questions in the back, let me know.
Sure. This actually follows right on Carlos's question. I think one of the most striking things that's been said this whole morning was said almost in passing by Rodrigo when he said that he didn't know of one one government program in the region that had a big impact, and that the good news was at the level of NGOs. That is a very stunning statement. And so, like Carlos, I was wondering, where do you see the obstacles? Is it lack of budgets, as we've heard a number of times in terms of taxes? Is it levels of corruption, lack of qualified personnel, lack of political will, some combination of the above. How do you get governments, both local, departmental, and national, to take on these issues in a more meaningful and impactful way?
Any more questions? Luis here.
Daniel Brun con RTI. Se ha hablado mucho hoy de temas de prevención y mi pregunta es más enfocado en los migrantes retornados. Quisiera saber qué se está haciendo en la sociedad civil o en las instituciones públicas para reintegrar o reinsertar a esa gente y específicamente a los menores.
Probably have time for one more. Way back. Oh, well. All right, we'll make it quick and we'll get two.
English, because I'm faster. I am convinced from your discussion that NGOs do great programs, and it certainly is appealing to have municipalities and say all crime is local work on them. But in Central America, municipalities don't have much power. They don't control education. They don't control health. They don't control just about police. And obviously there's a limit to how many NGOs anyone's going to finance. So I guess the other question is, can you do this without getting the national governments involved and committed?
And last word.
Anthony Fontes. Just a very quick question. Miguel mentioned the issue of sort of the elites, from every sort of elite having their own little charity and giving to that charity, and that being sort of the outlet for their philanthropic efforts. And I want to know, as practitioners working in all this stuff, what your relationship with sort of the elite sector and how you court that population, and what sort of reactions you get from the people who have the purse strings.
Okay. Miguel, you want to feel free to respond to contestar cualquier, y si quiere ignorar todos esos y hacer otro punto también se puede hacer. Pero adelante, por favor.
No, aquí no estamos para ignorar, sino Bien, primero sobre lo de la relación entre el trabajo de las ONGs y trabajo gubernamental. Yo tampoco santificaría a las ONGs, ¿verdad? Porque yo creo que es responsabilidad del Estado responder a las necesidades de los ciudadanos y especialmente de los más vulnerables. Y entonces tenemos que hacer toda la presión política para que sean los Estados los que resuelvan pues estas necesidades. Y por eso yo decía que desde la educación popular lo que pretendemos es una opción política. El problema del Estado, o mejor dicho, de los gobiernos, es que son efímeros, ¿verdad? Son transitorios, son discontinuos y desconocen esas buenas prácticas acumuladas que se van realizando en la sociedad civil y en el trabajo también de los gobiernos. Y este es un gran problema. Empieza un gobierno nuevo y rompe con lo anterior. En el caso de Guatemala, había una política de desarrollo social en el gobierno anterior, se llamaba Escuelas Abiertas, llega el nuevo gobierno, crea un Ministerio de Desarrollo Social, pensábamos que le iba a dar continuidad y hasta le cambió el nombre. Ya no se llaman Escuelas Abiertas, sino se le llaman Jóvenes Protagonistas. Había unas bolsas solidarias, de estas ayudas condicionadas, ahora se llaman bolsas seguras. La bolsa es la misma, pero cambia el nombre, ¿verdad? Y cambian los clientes de estas bolsas, ¿verdad? Si eran de un partido, ahora son de otro. Entonces, el problema es que no son programas de gobierno, son programas de partidos que están en el gobierno. Y eso no ayuda al pueblo, ¿verdad? Eso no ayuda a la sociedad civil. Y en el caso de las élites, la caridad de las élites que decía Anthony, bueno, en el caso, yo no sé si a estas grandes élites les interesa el cambio social. Esa es la pregunta, ¿verdad? Porque una cosa es la caridad y otra cosa es la justicia. Entonces son dos enfoques distintos. Una cosa es dar limosna y otra cosa es dar un subsidio, una subvención para promocionar a esas personas. Entonces hay muchas instituciones de caridad que no transforman la sociedad, sino que la mantienen. Y eso, bueno, A ciertos grupos ya les está bien, pero a los grupos vulnerables, desde los que estamos aquí protagonizando en el día de hoy, hay que establecer un cambio. No son medidas paliativas las que necesitan los jóvenes que están en las pandillas, sino cambios quirúrgicos, ¿no? Y no es tan fácil rehabilitar un pandillero. Yo diría que es imposible. Perdonen, yo creo que es casi imposible. Conozco pandilleros y la única rehabilitación a veces es cuando salen de la cárcel irse del país, porque si no los matan. Entonces no hay que invertir en rehabilitación, hay que invertir en habilitación. Digo, ¿cómo habilitamos ciudadanos honestos, no corruptos, que no pacten con la impunidad, que sean críticos y transformadores de la sociedad, es decir, hombres y mujeres educados que ejerzan sus derechos? Ese es el reto grande, y ese garante de ese reto tiene que ser el Estado, pero un Estado que articule todas las instituciones, que busque un fin común, como les decía yo, buscar esa promesa de valor. ¿Qué podemos hacer juntos que solos no podemos? Y con una intencionalidad de buscar ese bien común y no un bien particular.
Catherine?
Ditto. To talk about the scaling question, the funding and state, we're in a hiatus right now. Our funding from USAID ended in March of this year, and we've been working through the UNDP with the World Bank and another initiative, but then also over the last 2.5 years in conversations with the Multilateral Investment Fund of the IDB to be able to continue the program that we've had, but reach scale and sustainability. So the analysis then, Carlos also and Cynthia, about where do we take this program and where do we install it so it has a permanent Salvadoran home? And so we've looked at several factors. What are the government institutions that are responsible for different pieces of the model that we've done? What are the government institutions that have sufficient level of institutionality and processes, procedures, et cetera, to be able to do this? And what are the government institutions that have the funding to be able to do it? As Rodrigo mentioned, he doesn't know of government programs. We did a really quick and dirty study of what sort of NGO programs are out there for employability for at-risk youth, and what Salvadoran government programs are available for employability for at-risk youth. We found a bunch, all funded with international aid. That's not sustainable. So this is the good news here. The work that we're hoping to be able to do with the IDB, with the Multilateral Investment Fund, would be able to take all the learning that we've had and work within SAFOR, the Salvadoran Institute for Professional Training, which is the entity that is responsible for vocational training in El Salvador, for them to hardwire into their programming. And they are very interested. They have already put in funding for next year to be able to start directly funding implementation for the Jóvenes Constructores model. And the idea would be then that we would start to transfer this program to them and that they would have a permanent home and permanent funding stream. The issue will be to continue to maintain the quality while we're working for the sustainability in larger scale. We still don't have the funding nailed down yet, though, on that. But that's the plan. And what Miguel was saying about, these people rotating in and out, INSAFOR is a more stable institution as well in terms of the staffing, its institutional structure, et cetera. So we're hoping that will produce these longer-term results. Because, I've lived in El Salvador for 20 years. And government come and government go, and everybody wants to change and leave their mark, and it's their program. And it's even more so with the municipal governments. yes, we need to be working with municipal governments, but we need to figure out the right way to work with those municipal governments. And I don't see them necessarily implementing these types of programs, but figuring out how to develop the framework of standards and accountability and funding sources so that NGOs can be able to implement them, similar to how things work here. A lot of NGOs compete for government funds to be able to implement community-based programs on the ground. Trauma. That's huge. You can't have programs that provide life skills for kids. Well, you have to have programs that provide life skills. Let me change that around. But you can't advertise them as, this is a life skills program. That's usually where we start to deal with the trauma to a certain extent with psychologists and social workers. Kids will not sign up for a life skills program. They want to know what the vocational training program is. And so the hook is the meat, but they will tell you afterwards if you've got a really good program and really good staff that are working with them, it's the life skills that have made the difference. And it's them being able to process the trauma in that. We have made sure that in all of our program sites we have psychologists and social workers. We've also found out, though, I was being bombarded by the psychologists and social workers saying, we need a referral system. We need to know where to refer these kids, these families to, because we can't deal with the violence going on in the household. This child has been raped, they've seen murders. We're talking about some pretty serious stuff. And it was way beyond the skills of the psychologists and social workers. In working with a program in Los Angeles, Soledad Enrichment Action, the psychologist on staff there, who's a priest, helped me understand that the training that psychologists receive in Central America is a bachelor's degree. To be able to do this work, you need a doctorate. Those programs don't exist. And so while we're working and providing those types of services, for program staff, we need to hardwire in the trauma care for them. They are on the front lines, and I see the suffering that they go through as well. And we have not been able to figure that out. That's one of the big pieces that still needs to be figured out in this, of how to do that. And then the migrantes retornados. I just want to say one point on the in the previous presentation in the first panel. The percentage, the types of crimes that migrants get picked up for and are returned for, the large volume of those are for traffic violations or for alcohol-related cases. Drunk driving, being drunk in public, maybe being drunk and spousal abuse or things like that. They are not the horrible, heinous crimes, the vast majority of those. However, that doesn't mean, though, that when you send somebody who has been gang involved, that they don't have a higher impact in society when they get back. So just to mention that in this discussion. The programs for returned migrants are few. There are reception programs immediately for Central Americans being deported from the U.S. as well as from Mexico. Your point of contact is the immediate time when they come in and are received either at the airport or wherever the buses come in. In El Salvador, they've been trying to beef those up, those immediate services, but then because people go dispersed territorially, it's very hard to provide follow-up services. It's something that we are, from CRS, looking at not only nationally but also regionally. And the Salvadoran government has developed an analysis looking at there needs to be 21 different types of programming that go on to deal with the multiple types of issues from of migrants, their families, and children, including immediate trauma care. So there are plans being put into place between the different countries. They are unequal and uneven. And again, resources are part of that issue. Yeah, Miguel said it all really well about the elites. So,
Rodrigo, any final comments? Or?
Yeah, I mean, very quickly. On the question from Carlos and Cindy on the tension between whether government programs are adopting good practices and progress in that area, and what are the obstacles, and what I mean, as I said before, I do see some progress. At the same time, I think the challenges are that this is a very complex agenda, and sometimes I think, I mean, you see governments being overwhelmed with also, you know, proposals or suggestions from, I mean, I think sometimes donors were part of the problem also. Each of us comes with their own ideas and suggestions on how to approach, and often you see sort of weak capacity in terms of leading the dialogue, leading the policy dialogue, coordinating, you know, all this advice from donors, and so I think that's, I mean, there are differences. Some countries are better at it than others, but part of this, I think it's a process of institutional maturity or maturation. It takes time to understand, you know, what are all the different pieces that you need to put in place, and you know, make gradual progress. So I do think I do see some progress, but there's still much more that needs to be done. And in terms of I mean, and national governments do have, I think, a critical role in this. I mean, it's not part of what they need to do is to set the sort of the policy framework, the enabling environment, the priorities in terms of what are the areas and the cities and the municipalities and the territories where resources need to be targeted, which I mean, often is in a way one of the advantages of this, if you want, topic is that it's very territorially targeted. So, but not always resources go to those places. So part of the role of the national government is to coordinate whatever resources it has in those areas, which of course brings the challenge of coordination, and that's where I think giving more power also to municipal or local councils that are able to that know much better their territory, and that can direct those resources in a more effective way. It's part of the institutional architecture and the pacts between the national government and the municipal governments that are needed. And I also think that for us, what we need is, I mean, as international community, we need to find, not go with the Cadillac. I think sometimes we have a tendency to go with very sophisticated models. So how, you know, do we help really adapt some of these good practices to the realities of the of these countries? And I think trauma is maybe one of the areas where, I mean, you need, although you need sophisticated providers at one level, you also need to look for sort of community-based approaches that help you, you know, reach a large number of people with at a low cost, and I think that's the type of advice that you need to provide, or we need to provide. We are working with the private sector. We think the private sector is should be part of the solution to the problem. They are affected. There are progressive groups that want to be part of the solution and contribute. And they do have some tools. They also need education. I mean, there's a lot of, I think, misconceptions and fears, and knowing, sometimes it's about knowing what has been done in other countries where the private sector has had a very positive role. Brazil, I mean, there are many examples, Colombia, many others. That's part of what we are trying to do, and you know, bring about to try to facilitate the dialogue with government. I mean, this is one area where organizations like the World Bank, sometimes it's easier for us to bring to the table private sector and the government to try to come to agreements on certain issues than for the government to do it itself. So that's part of what we try to do.
Okay, join me in thanking our panelists. We didn't come away with a recipe to solve this problem, but I don't think that was our goal or our intention. We did get some great ideas. If I could just shamelessly promote an upcoming event that is related to our discussion. We're partnering with the Latin America Bureau of the USAID to present impact evaluations of their prevention programs in Central America. This is kind of the most extensive effort at doing exactly that impact evaluation that Catherine was mentioning. The evaluations were conducted by Vanderbilt University's LA POP, the Latin America Public Opinion program, very sophisticated methodology. That will be on October 30th, and you'll get an invitation, obviously, but I think we want to continue this discussion about what works. We know some of the problems, but we want to talk about what works and what we can learn from what we've been attempting to do along the way. So thank you all very much. Again, thank you to Carlos, to Cindy Arnson, Director of the program, and to all of my colleagues that helped put this together. Have a good day.